Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis sat behind her polished mahogany desk, eyes fixed on the thick folder marked, Trump Case, Georgia. The weight of national attention pressed heavily on her shoulders. This wasn't just any investigation, it was the cornerstone of the Democratic establishment's final hope to keep Donald Trump off the 2024 ballot. She had become the face of the Lawfare strategy, sweeping through blue strongholds, prosecuting political rivals in the name of justice. But what she didn't expect, what none of them expected, was Pam Bondi. Once Florida's bold Attorney General, Bondi was now the U.S. Attorney General appointed by President Donald J. Trump in his triumphant return to the White House. In her short time in office, she had proven to be a fierce lioness, tearing through bureaucratic red tape and exposing corruption buried deep in the Justice Department's corridors. Quietly but meticulously, Bondi had been investigating weaponized prosecutions, cases where the justice system had been twisted into a political weapon. And Fulton County was next on her radar. Meanwhile, at the Justice Department in D.C., Bondi convened a war room. The walls were lined with case files, affidavits, and internal memos. A single whiteboard had a large red circle around two words, Lawfare Network. Her team had found patterns, disturbing ones. Across several blue-run counties, local DAs had initiated investigations into conservative figures under shaky legal footing. But Fulton County stood out. There were leaks to the press, secret meetings with top Democratic operatives, and worst of all, alleged political donations linked to quid pro quo promises. Pam Bondi's top investigator, a sharp ex-FBI agent named Jack Marlowe, placed a USB drive on her desk. "You'll want to see this," he said grimly. Bondi inserted the drive into her secure laptop. On screen popped a series of emails, one between Fani Willis's office and a known Democratic super PAC operative. They discussed media rollout strategies, donation bundling, and even a suggestion of prepping Georgia judges in advance. Bondi leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. They thought nobody would notice. That was their mistake. 2 days later, in Atlanta, Fani Willis received a formal notice. The Department of Justice was opening a federal investigation into potential prosecutorial misconduct in her office. The charges were vague on purpose. Bondi wasn't just chasing headlines. She was building a bulletproof case. The media erupted. CNN's tone turned panicked. MSNBC hosted emergency roundtables. Social media exploded with hashtag #StandWithFani and hashtag BondiBlitz. Democrats scrambled for damage control while Republicans celebrated what they called the first real accountability for years of political targeting. Fani Willis held a press conference in a crisp blue suit, defiant as ever. "This is nothing more than a political witch hunt, an effort to intimidate me from pursuing justice." But behind the curtain, panic had set in. Her deputy DA had just resigned. An anonymous whistleblower from her office had reached out to Bondi's team. And worst of all, internal memos were surfacing, memos that hinted at coordination with federal officials in the previous Biden administration. Back in D.C., Bondi stared out her office window as the sun set behind the Capitol. "She thinks this is political," she said to Marlowe. "But we're about to show the American people exactly what political prosecution really looks like." The DOJ building in Washington, D.C. was buzzing. Pam Bondi's investigation into Fulton County had become the single most watched operation in the country. But while the media speculated endlessly, Bondi's team was deep in quiet strategy meetings. Jack Marlowe entered the secure briefing room holding a red folder marked Confidential. Behind him was a tall, nervous man in a wrinkled gray suit and black-rimmed glasses. His name was Marcus Riley, a mid-level investigator from Fani Willis's inner team. And he was about to change everything. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," Marcus began, voice low and trembling. "But what's happening in Fulton County isn't about justice anymore. It's about revenge. Political gain." Bondi leaned in, focused. Her demeanor calm, steady, almost motherly. "You're safe here, Marcus. Just tell us what you know." And so he did. According to Marcus, the entire Trump investigation had taken a disturbing turn months before it was announced publicly. Evidence had been cherry-picked. Testimony from constitutional scholars warning against overreach was deliberately excluded from internal reports. Even more shocking, Marcus revealed that Fani Willis held secret strategy sessions with senior members of the Democratic National Committee where she laid out a roadmap not for prosecution but for political timing. "They wanted indictments just before Super Tuesday," he whispered, pulling out email printouts. "Not because the case was ready, but because it would do the most damage." Bondi sat in silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. This wasn't just overreach. It was sabotage. Election interference in broad daylight. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, pressure on Fani Willis mounted. Leaks from her own office had reached conservative journalists, and talk radio was ablaze with speculation. On Fox News, Tucker Carlson hammered the story nightly. They accused Trump of interfering in elections, and now we have proof that they were the ones doing it all along. On Capitol Hill, House Republicans launched a parallel congressional hearing on political prosecutions in the Biden era. Fani was subpoenaed to testify. Democrats cried foul, insisting the investigations were retaliatory. But it didn't matter, the tide was turning. Back at the DOJ, Bondi's team moved fast. They weren't going to give the establishment time to regroup. Within a week, the Department of Justice filed a formal petition with the Georgia State Bar Association urging them to suspend Fani Willis's law license pending an investigation. At the same time, the DOJ requested a federal grand jury be convened to examine misuse of public office, violation of prosecutorial ethics, and conspiracy to interfere in a federal election. The country was in shock. MSNBC anchors looked like they had seen ghosts. CNN tried to soften the narrative, calling it a partisan stunt, but the documents were out now: emails, text messages, and signed depositions. Even the Washington Post was forced to admit that there appeared to be troubling coordination between Democratic operatives and Fani Willis's office. One moment from that week would go viral. At a fiery press briefing, a young CNN reporter confronted Pam Bondi with a loaded question. "Ms. Bondi, isn't this just political payback? You're going after a black woman who challenged Donald Trump. That's what people are saying." Bondi didn't blink. "I'm not going after anyone's color, gender, or party. I'm going after corruption. If a Republican DA did this, I'd be on them just as hard. This is not about revenge, it's about restoring the rule of law." The room fell silent. Bondi continued. "You want to talk about weaponizing the justice system? Let's talk about secret meetings with party officials, hidden memos, and evidence suppression. That's not justice. That's lawfare, and I'm here to end it." Her words echoed across America. That night, #BondiBoom trended #1 on X, formerly Twitter. Her face appeared on every major news outlet. Liberals fumed. Independents leaned in. Conservatives cheered. But no one could deny it anymore. Pam Bondi had just drawn first blood. Inside the white-pillared Georgia state capitol, the tension was as thick as molasses. Democratic lawmakers held closed-door emergency meetings while whispers of resignations, plea deals, and cover-ups floated through the halls. The Fulton County DA's office, once the pride of progressive legal activism, was now a fortress under siege. Pam Bondi wasn't letting up. The grand jury in D.C. had started calling witnesses. Marcus Riley, the whistleblower, was first. Then came junior prosecutors, political consultants, and even a state judge who allegedly warned Willis about overstepping constitutional boundaries. Every testimony added weight to Bondi's case that the Trump indictment in Georgia had been strategically planned, politically driven, and legally flimsy. Meanwhile, Trump, now back in the Oval Office, was unusually quiet. His team knew better than to celebrate too early. Bondi's investigation had to be airtight because if even one piece collapsed, the media would spin it as vindication for Willis. And so Bondi kept working. She had 4 major pieces lined up for release. Financial records showing campaign donations flowing to PACs linked to Fani Willis from Democratic megadonors shortly before she announced charges. Meeting logs proving DNC legal strategists consulted on the indictment before it was filed. Internal Slack chats between staffers mocking legal norms and celebrating Trump's legal coffin. A video clip from a fundraiser where Willis, after a few drinks, joked about keeping Trump locked in court so he can't campaign. The video was the nuke. Once authenticated, Bondi knew it had to be handled perfectly. No leaks. No teasers. This wasn't about likes and shares. It was about exposing the entire lawfare industry, and she was about to go scorched earth. On Capitol Hill, the House Oversight Committee called an emergency hearing titled Weaponized Justice, a Pattern of Partisan Prosecution. Bondi was the star witness. Cameras rolled as she sat before the packed room, flanked by constitutional scholars and 2 former federal prosecutors. Her opening statement was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. For years, we were told that no one is above the law. But what we weren't told is that some people were willing to twist the law to stay above accountability. The justice system was never meant to be used as a campaign tool. And yet, that's exactly what we've uncovered. She paused. This isn't just about one DA. It's about a pattern. A network. A system where justice was hijacked in the name of political expediency. That stops now. The room erupted into murmurs. The committee chair tried to bang the gavel to quiet them, but the truth had already shattered the silence. That night, Bondi's team made their move. At 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the DOJ released a public briefing and dropped the video of Fani Willis on a secure government portal. In it, Willis, clearly unaware she was being filmed, laughed at a private party in Atlanta while holding a cocktail. "Look, y'all, we don't need Trump behind bars. Just drag him through court until November. He'll be too busy suing to campaign. Works just as good." The footage broke the internet. CNN refused to air it. MSNBC called it selective editing. But Fox News, Newsmax, and independent platforms ran it in full. Within hours, even moderates were calling for accountability. #Lawfare exposed. #ResignFani. #Bondi Storm. The hashtags took over every platform. Protests formed outside the Fulton County Courthouse. Legal experts flipped. Overnight, the narrative had changed. The next morning, under mounting pressure, the Georgia State Bar Association suspended Fani Willis's license pending full investigation. One of her deputies resigned. Another flipped, offering to testify for full immunity. And for the first time since the Trump indictment saga began, Democrats were on defense. The morning sun spilled across the marble floors of the Department of Justice. Pam Bondi stood at the window of her office, coffee in hand, watching the city below awaken under a storm of headlines. Fani Willis suspended, Pam Bondi uncovers Lawfare network, and Democrats in panic mode. But Bondi wasn't celebrating. She knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If Fani Willis had acted alone, this would have ended with her disbarment and maybe a criminal charge. But as Bondi's investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover a nationwide network, district attorneys, nonprofit legal, activist, firms, and political consultants working in tandem to target conservative voices across America. A common pattern emerged: get a headline, drag out the process, influence the election. They weren't interested in winning trials, they were interested in weaponizing them. That's when Bondi decided to go public with the full case. At a nationally televised DOJ press conference, she stepped up to the podium wearing her signature white blazer, flanked by U.S. Marshals and top federal investigators. "What we've uncovered is bigger than any one prosecutor," she said into the cameras. "It is a coordinated operation designed to intimidate political opponents, distort the justice system, and manipulate public opinion." She then laid out the Lawfare triangle, a term coined by her office to describe the trio of actors involved in the scheme. Activist DAs like Fani Willis, who bring high-profile but legally weak cases against political figures. Media allies who amplify the narrative and spin legal actions into moral crusades. Political PACs and dark money groups who fund the process and benefit electorally. Bondi ended the press conference with a call to arms, not politically, but constitutionally. Every American, regardless of party, should be outraged. This isn't justice. This is tyranny in a trench coat. The fallout was nuclear. Left-wing media melted down. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow compared Bondi to a modern-day McCarthy. The New York Times ran a headline that read, "Is this the end of progressive prosecution?" But it didn't matter. Pam Bondi had won the public. A bipartisan poll from Gallup revealed a stunning shift. 58% of Americans, including 34% of Democrats, believed political bias had infected state-level prosecutions. Meanwhile, Fani Willis, now suspended and facing criminal charges of abuse of office, conspiracy, and perjury, appeared on camera for the first time since the scandal exploded. In a desperate attempt at damage control, she accused Bondi of orchestrating a personal vendetta and trying to silence black female prosecutors. But the public didn't buy it. "This isn't about race. This is about righteousness," one Atlanta resident told reporters. "We believed in Fani, but she let power go to her head. And Pam Bondi? She's the only one telling the truth." The Democrat Lawfare strategy was collapsing fast. In private meetings, Democratic strategists panicked. The dominoes had started falling. Alvin Bragg in Manhattan faced new scrutiny over political funding sources. Letitia James in New York had her past communications with the DNC subpoenaed. Progressive think tanks that supported legal campaigns against Trump allies were suddenly being audited. And at the center of it all stood Pam Bondi. Unflinching. Resolute. A symbol of accountability in an era of weaponized justice. One quiet evening, in a rare moment of solitude, Bondi sat on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, taking in the view. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from President Donald Trump. "America sees you now." "Thank you, Pam. Let's finish the fight." She smiled, not as a politician but as a patriot. Because this wasn't about Trump anymore. This was about America's soul. 700+ words to complete the 3,000-word story. By midsummer, the legal war that had begun with a quiet indictment in Georgia had exploded into a full-blown national reckoning. Pam Bondi's investigation had pierced the veil not just of Fani Willis but of an entire machine that had treated the legal system like a weapon of war. Federal investigations were now open in 4 states. Multiple progressive prosecutors had quietly stepped down. A few even started cooperating in exchange for immunity. The Department of Justice, under Bondi's watch, had set up a new task force named Justice Integrity and Ethics Division (JIED), aimed solely at rooting out political bias in prosecutions. The move was met with thunderous applause in conservative circles and hushed dread in liberal ones. Meanwhile, Fani Willis was now a pariah in Atlanta. Once a rising Democratic star, she had been reduced to late-night punchlines and legal cautionary tales. Her trial for abuse of office loomed, and it was being prosecuted by federal attorneys appointed by Bondi. In a stunning twist of irony, Willis's own defense attorney would later argue that she had been manipulated by political influencers who viewed her as a tool. Bondi, however, remained focused not on vengeance but on restoring trust. The real shift came when Bondi made an appearance before a joint session of Congress. It was a rare event, broadcast live across the country. Even mainstream networks like ABC and CBS couldn't ignore it. Dressed in a sharp blue suit with a calm voice and steady tone, Pam Bondi addressed the nation. Justice should be blind, not partisan. When our legal system becomes a tool of political warfare, it's not just candidates who suffer, it's the people. We cannot allow prosecutors to act as campaign operatives. That ends now. She paused. This isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. The speech became one of the most watched political broadcasts of the year, drawing praise even from moderate Democrats. And it worked. Congress passed the Nonpartisan Prosecution Reform Act, requiring mandatory third-party reviews of political cases at the state level and banning district attorneys from running for office within 5 years of filing politically charged indictments. The law was bipartisan, and it bore Bondi's fingerprints. President Trump, in a Rose Garden ceremony, signed the bill into law with Bondi by his side. Pam is a warrior for justice, Trump said. She didn't just defend me, she defended every American from a corrupt system. This law will protect future generations from the kind of lawfare we've seen. It was a full-circle moment. The same legal system that had been turned against Trump was now reformed in his presidency by the woman he trusted most. But perhaps the most profound impact was cultural. Late-night comedians who had once mocked Bondi fell silent. Hollywood actors who championed lock him up campaigns were now on the defensive. Law students across the country debated the ethics of weaponized indictments. Newsrooms scrambled to update their narratives. Even CNN's Anderson Cooper, in a rare moment of clarity, said on air, "Whether you agree with her politics or not, Pam Bondi just taught the country that justice isn't about sides, it's about truth." Months later, at a candlelit Veterans Gala in Texas, Bondi took the stage one last time. She wasn't there as a prosecutor, not as a political figure, but as a guest of honor. A Marine veteran injured in Afghanistan introduced her with reverence. When our country was being pulled apart by politics, she reminded us that law and order matter. That fairness still matters. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. Pam Bondi smiled, not for the cameras, but for the country. Because in the end, the fight wasn't about winning headlines or courtrooms. It was about saving the soul of American justice. And thanks to her, it was redeemed.